So, hello everyone. A very good morning. I know it's pretty early. Uh, Today we are here to talk about database migrations and more about the little things that often go under the radar in a migration project. So, about me, as Andres was just talking about, I am from Uttarakhand. That's a part of India where it almost snows. Well, it does snow sometimes. So, I am working with I'm working currently with Pithin, and I'm a presenter. I've presented at Groundbreaker Store over the past few years, various user groups across India, and I'm also involved with AIOUG. That's the Indian Oracle User Group. So as I was talking about Pithin, so this is us. Now, what is the agenda for today? Here's the interesting stuff. So today we are going to talk about everything around a migration other than the migration itself. So we are not talking about a migration strategy. We are not talking about the usual things that you'll find uh, in your MOS documents or your documentation. Everything other than that probably needs to be incorporated in our migration plans or our upgrade plans, and things that are uh, pretty small, pretty trivial, that look pretty trivial when kept alone, but are often missed. So let's begin. So the first thing whenever we begin a migration project is, of course, the question, where are we going? What version do you want to go to? What is it all about? So whenever you want to make this decision, what would be your primary constraint? Your primary restraint is most likely in 90% of the cases going to be your application compatibility. That is what is going to drive this entire project. So if your application, let's say, you need to figure out what your application is compatible with, the database it is compatible with, as well as the OS or the kernel it is compatible with. Once you have this information, this is where you're going to begin your journey from. Now, again, OS and kernel, why are they important? They're not really important. I mean, why do we care where your application resides, what OS or what kernel is compatible to your application? It really doesn't affect a database administrator as such, but in your entire ecosystem, it would be good to standardize your OS to leverage the benefits of automatic patching or any other infrastructure subscriptions. So that is why it is always a good thing to know what what ecosystem your system is residing on. So let's say, for the sake of argument, or in our example, we determine that we want to go to 19C and we're going to use Oracle Enterprise Linux, right? So what next? Uh, a very familiar screen. We plug in this information and we get this piece of result. We come to see that these are the versions that are certified with 19C, because we're interested specifically in OEL. So now we just open it up and we get a ton of information. So the interesting bit in this information is the minimum RU that you'll look, and the kernel versions. So this is probably where the fun begins. So this is the information that we just saw, that if you want to go to OEL 8, the minimum version that's supported is 19.7. And these are a couple of options regarding the OS kernels. You can either go with the UEK options, the unbreakable kernel, or the the Red Hat compatible kernel. Uh, how do you choose, or what next? Now, very important note that's there is highlighted at the end. It's the ACFS node. Now, it is a bit misleading if you just look at this, because this node just does not talk about ACFS. It talks about AFD, ASMFD as well, or AFD, your ASM filter driver. Now, this is where more restrictions can come in. If you look closely, if we choose the RHE, the Red Hat RHE kernel, it says that your so it says that your ACFS versions, I mean, with ACFS 9.12 is certified, with AFD 9.12 is certified. Interestingly, 9.13 is out now. But even so, I mean, this kind of adds an upper cap to our options of the RUs that we can go to, or the kernels that we can install on our system. Now, similarly, if you look at UEK, notice it is only, till date, it is only applicable, it is only certified with 19.10. It's not certified with 19.11, 12, or 13. So this again caps our option of RUs that we want to go to. Again, as a tip, once you've installed your OS, it's always a good practice to use the AFD driver state supported or ACFS driver state supported to just verify whether your whether these functionalities are available to you or not. You can see if when it errors out, you can see when it is supported. It's a pretty obvious output that you receive. Again, these were the options that we were talking about. So if you want to stick with OEL, these are the DB versions that we can go to. If you want to go to if you want to go to RHC, these are the versions, and if you want to go to UEK, these are our versions these are the options that we have. Now, let's say we choose that we want to go to Red Hat compatible kernel. That's what our organization plans to use, and of course, you need your system admin inputs for this. So once you've decided that, or you've got the input that okay, let's stick with RHC, then this is what finally your options are down to with 19C. So again, I guess the next question is the RU question. Which RU should you go to? Sometimes it's pretty, the push would come, go to the latest and greatest. That's what definitely you're going to hear from Oracle, that be on the latest and greatest. But really, should you? Before you go, be careful about your friendly neighborhood bug. Look at the known issues. That's what I mean. How do you do that? Every patch has an advisory associated with it. For example, this is April, January, you'll find an advisory associated with every release. Look it up. Don't forget about the advisory. Look up the critical issues. Now, these advisories can get overwhelming for a bit. I mean, you literally feel like a doomsday situation where, if you find 15 bugs, 16 bugs that you keep on thinking, okay, I might hit that bug, this bug. Don't worry. Be on a lookout for critical bugs that might crash your system, or more importantly, affect your query result. So there are many parallel related bugs that can, or Broom filter bugs that at times alter your query results. These are pretty important because these can cause real issues. So be on a lookout for these bugs. Say, for example, you see a bug, an identified bug on the latest version, avoid it if the one of patch is not available or the bug fix is not available. Try and avoid that particular RU. Again, as I mentioned, identify the one-off patches. These are the documents that come for 19C, where there are really recommended patches for your 19C version. Depending on your RU, there'll be a couple of one-off patches. Now, these patches do cater to Exadata performance optimizer related fixes. Now, all these patches that we're talking about, these are still only on the target system. So target home, if you're upgrading, if you're migrating, in that case, it is about your target system on for in that case, in any case, it is about your target system. So if you are okay, so sorry, that broke my chain of thought. I apologize for that. So if you're migrating, these are the patches that are recommended for your target system. Now, the other thing that you also need to be careful about are your source systems. Now, for your source system, you do need to look at data pump, DBUA, rack upgrade. There could be bugs related to root.sh, right? At times, you just issue a root.sh, and that when you're upgrading your cluster, and that can lead to issues. So it's always a good idea to refer this particular article, and you will find the recommended patches for your lower version, your source. So this will ensure that your entire migration process, when you use scripts like migration scripts for DBUA or perhaps even auto upgrade or data pump, you avoid hitting those bugs. You don't want to be risking running into a bug during the migration day. So it's always a good idea to look it up, review it, and then implement the bug fix. So after all this discussion, let's say we finally decided that we want to be on 19.10, right? One of the last things that you would want to do is, I mean, this is not too much information that this article is going to give you, because it is pretty well known. This is more about your disk groups and disk compatibility with your ASM version compatibility and database RDBMS compatibility. So, I mean, not too critical information about from one thing, which often gets missed. The thing is, if you're using Flex ASM and you plan to have a database that is lower than 12, then you've got to be aware. What do you need to be aware about? Let's say you've got a 4-node cluster. in your 4-node cluster, you want to host an 11G database. So what will happen is you start 3 instances. The minute you start the 4 instances, it's not going to work. Why? Because by default, the cardinality of your ASM Flex cluster is 3. So, excuse me, in case you want a 4-node setup, you will need to modify your ASM cardinality. And how do you do that? You can go and you can check your cluster mode, and then you can modify your ASM cardinality. So this is a very small thing, but then again, you don't want to risk running into this. So if you are working with Flex cluster, review your ASM cardinality, check if your database versions that you are working on are compatible with ASM Flex, and if you required, modify the cardinality so that you get a local instance on each node of your cluster. So the last thing that we want to talk about in terms of fixes is enabling those bug fixes that were shipped. So as you're aware, with PSUs and RUs, we get bug fixes, but they are not enabled. They're disabled by default. They're shipped but disabled. Why are they disabled? They're mostly disabled because they have the potential to change optimizer behavior, which is extremely dangerous. So if you're just applying a RU, or if you're just doing a security patching, at that point, it is probably not recommended to enable those bug fixes, optimizer bug fixes, because unless you are, of course, doing an end-to-end application testing, that if you're doing the testing, go ahead and enable them. But if not, it's probably not a good idea. But when you're migrating or you're upgrading to a new version, at that point, it is a given that you are going to conduct a thorough application testing. In that case, use the DBMS Optim bundle and be sure to conduct the testing. The benefit of this is that since you'll already be conducting the upgrade testing, you can use, this will just nicely merge into this entire scenario. So don't forget to enable the bug fixes for the RUs that you've been using. You can enable them using this particular command. So what we've seen thus far is when you are, what is the checklist, or what are the things that you need to be careful about when you are choosing a versions? What are the things that should be a part of your checklist? You should probably go through these notes and verify and confirm what are the things that you can look at. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. So now that we've determined our version, that we know where we are going to, and we've chosen our particular bug fixes to now we've got to prepare, right? So what are the things some things that we can do other than the usual OS preparation guide that we get from Oracle? That is, most of the things are covered by pre-installation RPM nowadays. So let's not talk about that. Other than that, what do we get? So one of the things is use this opportunity and patch your, ensure that your OS is up to date. You've got the latest security fixes applied. Similarly, another thing of interest right now is time zone. Now this is pretty interesting. So time date CTL is something that gives you the time zone of your server. This is the command. And as you can see, it tells you that on 7th of November, your daylight saving is going to end. So you get all the information. So again, why do we care? Why do we as database administrators bother about this? So one of the reasons why you would care would be that sysdate and systimestamp do not use the database time zone. So excuse me, you've got to be careful about this. When you do a select sysdate from Duel or a systimestamp from Duel, you're not actually, this has got nothing to do with the database time zone. What it does, it uses a call called a system call called get time of day, and using this particular OS call is going to fetch the information. Now this information is going to depend on the time zone. What? Time zone, and this behavior is going to differ as well. So let me talk about this. So this behavior will differ if you're using local or bequeath connections versus when you're using connections that come over the listener. What do I mean by all this? What I mean is that let's take an example of bequeath connections. So as you noticed in the previous slides, that my time zone over here is America, or EDT -4, right? So moving forward, I do a select systimestamp from Duel and I get -4. That's the time zone my server was on. I just change this variable to UTC. I connect and this is the time zone that I get, right? So this is what I mean. My times, my sys timestamp, my sys date, this is influenced by the time, the variable that is set, or more precisely, the variable that was set when my session was initiated. Now, this is true only in the case of Beckwith connections, right? If you're using listener connections, the time zone variable that influences this output is the time zone when your instance was first started. Now, how do you control this particular time zone? Well, in rack systems, it's pretty simple. It is controlled via a file that's kept in your GI Home CRS install. It's this environment file or CRS environment file. This is how it looks like. So this file controls this particular output where it talks about, the time zone. This is the time zone. This is the time. And moving on. And any changes to this file requires a cluster restart. Okay. Right. So any changes to this file will require a restart of the entire cluster stack. So, but here's the thing. Now, this is the Oracle recommended way of controlling it, but at times this does not work. So what option do you have when it does not work? Well, the first thing you would want to do is you would want to figure out that what's happening, right? So let's take a look at the example. So here's an example where I've got 4 node rack. This is my target 1. I can see my time zone is -7. Target 2, -7. Target 3, -7. But on my 4th node, this is -6. Something is definitely wrong. And these are all connections over my listener. Okay. So what I do is go and check the environment file that I just spoke about. And in that environment file, I noticed that the variable or the time zone is exactly what it should be. This time zone is Phoenix, and this particular time zone is Denver, right? So my cluster should be on Phoenix, and 3 of the nodes are displaying the value of Phoenix as they should be, but 1 is incorrectly showing it as Denver. So as per the documentation, what we are supposed to do is we need to ensure that our time zone is correct. Now, but after migration, this is what we kept on noticing. So what we tried to troubleshoot, this is your instance SMON, look up the PID, do a strings on the process environment variable, and you notice that when this particular instance was started, this is the time zone that was set. And for some reason, this is the time zone that was picked up. Since this is the time zone that is, associated with the instance startup variable, environment variables, this is the information that every application that is connecting to this particular instance is getting. And if they try to, this queues up a lot of things, because there are monitoring, there are at times diagnostics, there are monitoring, and if any app is trying to use this particular call, then that is going to be problematic as well. So how do you get around it if changes to the environment file are not working? Well, there's another way. That way you can set the environment in the listener and database variables. So what we did was this is the option that you can take. You can set the environment variable over here, and then you'll need to restart your database and database instance basically, and as well as your affected listener on that particular local listener on that node. So that should take care of it. So this is why if you're migrating, it's always a good idea to just verify your time zones are in place, they are as expected, and everything is functioning. Excuse me. The next thing that we want to be, a bit careful about would be your temp files D. So Linux 7 introduces temp files D daemon. Now, this is basically for housekeeping of your temp files. It creates, it manages, it deletes files that are not in use. Now, by default, it is designed to delete files from temp and var temp, and these are the retentions, as you can see in the configuration file. Again, the question beckons, why do we care, right? Let temp file handle it. Well, we care because Oracle stores socket files in var temp. What are socket files? Socket files are files that are used by the RDBMS for inter-process communication. And if by any chance these files are deleted, let's just say we are in trouble, big trouble. It can lead to outage. There will be certain files that will lead to outage and certain files that can lead to outage. But certainly in most cases will not end well. So the bottom line is we do not want any process tampering with Oracle related files that are present in WhereTemp. And of course, to do that, what we could do is, this is a blog that will talk about all the dangerous things that can happen if this happens to you, all the symptoms and all the things that do happen. So if to avoid this, the best practice is to make sure that your temp configuration has these entries. Now, if you look at the the manual entry, you will see that the manual says that X is something that ignores or preserves the files in this particular directory. So you make the entry, you modify the file, you restart the daemon, and you just take a look that you just verify that your entries are present, and this is what you need to do. So this is a thing that is a must have in your checklist when you're migrating or upgrading to or upgrading your OS. Excuse me. Okay, the next thing is the time server. Now, Oracle Linux 7 again introduced cronny as a new option for NTP time synchronization. Now, after migrating, there have been a few instances where we've noticed a lot of CRS warnings and warnings in health checks, warnings in CRS logs, warnings in TFA, Aura check. Now, all these warnings, had a particular root cause. The root cause was that there were conflicts in your NTP. Why were the conflicts? So by design, or what we noticed was usually happening was that there was an NTPD daemon that used to say, I want to control NTP. And similarly, there's a cronny daemon that's also trying to control NTP. Now, this is leading to conflicts, which is leading to all these errors. Now, why is this conflict arising, or why do we have two daemons trying to control time on your server? This can usually happen when you've got automations, when you've got Ansible playbooks, you've got system automations that by default configure your NTDB conf file with your time servers, which has been happening with all the Oracle Linux lower versions, 7, 5, 6, 7, or whatever flavor of Linux you're on. So if you have playbooks that have been doing it and you continue to use the same playbook on your 7 and 8, what you can end up with is a dual configuration where you have manually configured ntpd.conf, and out of the box, you've got a chronic configuration in place as well. And that will lead to conflicts. So, I mean, again, the pretty obvious answer is to disable the service you do not need. Finalize your time server and stick to only one of these. You should not be running both these things together. So how do you, so let's say I want to stick with cronny. So I disable my NTPD. Simply, I disable the service, I stop my service. And also important, whatever I use NTPD or cronny, please configure your time server, configure it with your internal organization timekeeper time server entries. So this is the configuration file. You can simply configure it and restart your daemon. Again, the ill effects of happening. For example, once we had a very alarmed system admin who came to us informing us that our database server was trying to talk to a server called russianbrides.net. And it turned out it was because of a misconfigured cronny, where it was just using the default service, and from the free pool, it was just picking up stuff. So to avoid these situations, you should always, it's recommended to configure a time server. Similarly, if you're on a rack, do check for your slew search settings. With cronny, it is pretty, you've got those settings by default in place. It does not decrement the time in steps, it uses slew. So time drift, be aware of these NTP settings. Storage. Then now coming to storage, the best practice or the recommended practice with storage is that size your same disks, use the same size disks, right? And especially if you're consolidating a DB, it's very simple. You can use a simple script to map your devices and verify that your service is not in name. For example, another best practice would be you can use kfed to identify that your disk is in use, so that you don't accidentally overwrite your disk, right? You don't want to be doing that. Now, one recommendation or one thing that should be a part of your checklist would be to verify that your partitions are aligned. You can use parted to ensure that your physical disk sectors are aligned. And once you've checked the alignment, for example, here I can see this is SDM1. This is the first partition, right, that we intend to use. And I'm checking optimal for partition 1. For example, if this is a 30 GB disk. Example, if this was a 4 terabyte disk and I had divided it into 2 partitions, SDM1 and SDM2, 2 terabyte each, then I would have checked the alignment for optimal 1 for partition 1, similarly optimal 2 for the second partition, and verified that my disks are aligned. Excuse me, hold on. And once you've identified it, label your disks. You can label your disks, and in new installation, it's a bit different. You need to use the init option. You use this option just to initialize your disks because your installation has not yet been done. So this is just a syntax quirk that you need to be careful about. Again, your pre-installation RPM sets all your memories, sets your limits, but it sets the defaults. You might need to go in, review your memory, and reset it based on the RAM that you all actually have and you're planning to use. And don't forget the use of huge pages on Linux systems. Now, you can use memlock to verify that your your memory settings are as required and grep huge pages. Do not forget to use large pages and ensure rather that your database is using large pages. Now, 19C comes with new options, auto and auto only, where if you've not defined huge pages, the database is going to go and attempt to, now this is Exadata only if I'm not wrong, these options, where your database will automatically create huge pages and use them. Request for huge pages and pick them up. You don't need to pre-create huge pages. That is what the option is. But again, this is Exadata only. On your regular systems, do try and use at least true so that huge pages are picked up. And if you're running out of huge pages, verify and increase your huge pages accordingly or decrease your SGA. This is the note that we probably all of us have used to size our huge pages. But have it on a checklist, cross-check things. Again, after it is done, do not forget to reboot your server. One of the best things that reboot does is it verifies your persistent configuration. For example, if you've modified your MTU, you want to make sure that it's there in every file that needs, to every file in your network configuration so that your configuration is persistent. So as a best practice, restart your instance. Again, another thing that you could do is you could configure auto start. For auto start, we get by default dbstart and dbshut scripts, and you can integrate it with systemd services. So dbshut and dbstart, as we know, depend on ORATAP. So you've got to set the auto start field to Y. This will handle database and listener restarts. And if you have any custom listener or non-default listeners rather, do modify these scripts to ensure that dbshut and dbstart are handled by dbshut and dbstart handle your non-default listeners. Now, how do you do this? You can create a service. I call it Oracle DB.service. In this service, just create the service using systemctl. You create this particular file, right? In this particular file, this is the entry you can have where you're making calls start to dbshut, stop dbstart and dbshut. That is whenever the server reboots, it's going to make a call to dbstart. Whenever it shuts, it's going to make a call to dbshut and reload the server. Once you've reloaded it, you can enable the service, and then once you've enabled the service, again reboot it, and this will test whether your database is coming up as intended or not. So here we just took a look at security. These are the things we just check that we're good with. Moving on. Another important thing is identifying the clients. Now, why do we need to do that? We need to do that because we want to know where to make the changes. For updates of servers, DNS, firewall rules, we need to identify what the client is. So we need to know the client host. Similarly, if you've got SSL certificate, you could run into this if your SSL certificate changes, right? So what you want to identify is you want to identify which of your clients use a TCP/S protocol. Another thing that you might run into is an SSL negotiation failure. This could happen if you are still using desupported cipher suits. For this, what you want to know is the client version that your clients are running, right? Another thing that can happen is the authentication, no matching. I mean, this is again dependent on your client version. You can run into no matching authentication. So to get around this, you usually set these parameters to a lower version. These are your logon version client in your SQLnet.ora. What these does is that this has a side effect. This has a side effect on password case sensitivity. What it basically does is it can lead to a very simple and a very cryptic invalid username password error. I mean, it can throw you off. But what has actually happened is you've disabled case sensitivity. You want all your passwords to now be case insensitive. And you are basically disabling all case sensitive passwords in your database. This happens when this combination is in place. When you've got case sensitive password as false and you are trying to lower your compatibility in order to get around your lower client problem, right? So one of the workarounds is you allow lower clients to work around and you re-enable the case sensitivity. Or the second option would be you keep this setting, you allow lower clients, you keep this as false, you keep the password as case insensitive, but you then have to go and reset the passwords so that your database users have this combination of password version. That is, your database users have a case insensitive password. So if you're disabling the case insensitive and you want to change your authentication protocol, you have to ensure that your passwords are case insensitive. Similarly, so what we've seen is this is the information we need before we migrate or before we go on with a migration project, right? In fact, client character set is often pretty important at times. Now, how do we identify? Audit is probably the easiest way to do it. Enable this and you will have your DBA audit session populated, or if you're using unified auditing, unified audit trail view will be populated. So this view does not give us information about protocol or version. To get that, there's another view called $session connect info. This is a brilliant view. I mean, I really like this view. It's pretty handy. You get your machine. This information you already get with session, but this is the version, client version. You get the client version. You in fact even get the character set. And as we'll see later, you also get your protocol. Now, client version is an interesting thing. For versions greater than 12c, that view works fine. But for 11g versions, that view has issues. So what you can instead use is this particular $x table and this particular function. This converts the KSU's CLVSN into the human readable versions that we understand, right? So use this particular query and you will be able to get the client version, and then you can identify which are the versions that you want to upgrade. Similarly, as I talked about, this tells you the protocol. This is the TCP/S protocol. These particular programs are using TCP/S protocols, which means I need to update the certificates over here. So this does not store the information historically. So one thing you can do is you can create an after logon trigger. But triggers on production usually come with their own risks. So you've got your listener logs. You can crawl through your listener logs, right? You'll find a lot of information in your listener logs that are lying around on your server. For example, you can get the version. You can get, well, you don't want to get a failure message, but you can actually figure out the protocol as well. So let's look at the version first. You can crawl through your listener server, get the version and convert it into the human readable version. So now I know this particular host has a client, 19c client that's used to connect, or this particular host has a 12c client that is it's using to connect to my database. And you can create a small snippet and parse your listener log through it. So this will give you something like, I parse this script, I pass my listener log, and it gives me the version. This is the version that's there in the listener log and what is the associated client version. Or I can parse and I can figure out which host uses which protocols, right? It's a very simple thing. I'm just parsing my listener log, and I'm just using the same function to convert it into a human readable form. Okay, there are some really good tools. This is Listener Analyzer tool by Lyron, and there's this blog by Ivan, which has a lot of information about listener tracing. And you can use this Python tool if you want to. This will give you, this is more of troubleshooting because this is not going to give you protocols. This is going to give you more about at what time, what connections were coming, but these are pretty handy. They can come in handy. Uh, Again, once you figure out this information, you can plug it in and you can figure out what compatibility or what is the driver or what are the data clients that you want to upgrade. So over here, what we've reviewed is these are the things that you want to again check when you're going through a migration exercise and figure out and have this informations handy. Now, when you're doing an actual migration, what are the things? One of the thing is service migration. You have to handle your service migration aptly. So let's look at an example. What do I mean by that? This is my normal primary configuration where I've got a database. I've got 3 clients connecting to it. My DB name, unique name is ORCLA, SID, and services. These are the 2 services that are running on this particular database. Moving on, I have a data guard setup. Again, the data guard DB unique name is B, and I'm using the SID B. This is my setup that I have. Now I switch over and I conduct a migration. Once I've switched over, I have these things and I've migrated my services over here. But then we notice that this can happen. Suddenly one of the client breaks. The services that were running on source are the same services that are running on primary, but still we face this problem. One particular reason is that this is the error that we're getting, that the service is not recognized. So this could be, or this can happen if your service was if your application was using the SID service, the default service of your primary. So if you notice over here, this is my particular, this is my SID. So there would be a service associated with it. And my application ended up using this particular SID service for its operations, right? So now what I had to do in order to ensure that things work, you'll have to go ahead and add this particular service over here. So as a best practice, if you're using, if there is a change in SID when you're migrating, it's always a good idea to create that particular service for that particular SID as well. Now you eventually would want to phase it out, right? You don't want to be using that SID. You want very generic SID. So you can identify what connections are coming through that SID. You can use $V session connect info. It gives you the SIDs and maps it to the service that it's using. Update the clients, update the TNS on those clients as in when you get time, compile them to use the service identifier that you want, monitor the usage. Once no client is using the temporary SID, that the temporary service that we had set up, you can then go ahead and decommission it, phase it out, right? Another thing that you want to be careful about during migrations are the immutable properties. And this is specifically very important in terms of logical migration. So you've got logical migration, example, Golden Gate, data pump, blah, blah, blah. What you basically do is, or we have a source database and we have a empty target database. And then by some mechanism, we are going to copy over the data from source to target. So when we do that, there are certain immutable properties. For example, DB block size or character size is not immutable, but it is very difficult to modify. So when you're migrating beforehand, you want to make sure that these properties match the source and are exactly as you intended, because you will have difficulties changing them later. Another thing, initialization parameters, match them, make sure that you are reviewing them and they are exactly as you need, especially compatible, because that limits your downgrading option, especially if this is an upgrade project. Now, another thing you need to be careful about are the wallet files. The thumb rule of this is the wallet files should exist at the target and be accessible before the upgrades or migrations. So SQLnet.ora is what controls the location of your file, as we know. So you transfer the wallet and the file, you transfer the wallet over to the target and you upgrade the SQLnet.ora. So in terms of upgrade, all you need to do is, if you're working with upgrades, it can be DBUA or whatever tool you're using, auto upgrade, you need to ensure that you copy over the SQLnet.ora to the target home so that the target is aware about the wallet that it wants to use. Similarly, if it is a migration, you want to update your SQLnet.Aura as well as copy over the wallet that you want to use. So with encryption wallet, it should be a check in your checklist again that you have the right encryption keys. Again, if your credentials, if you plan to reset any of your passwords, don't forget to update your credential list in your wallets. Excuse me. The next thing is gather statistics, especially DBMS stats, your dictionary stats, as well as your fixed optic stats. Another tip in your logical migrations, use of DBMS stats is quicker versus exporting and importing statistics data pump. You've got all these packages available, export it, pack it, transfer it, and unpack it. SQL plan management. As a performance-based practice, you've got to capture and transfer the SQL baselines as well as profiles. So again, if it is a data pump, you probably will. If it is an upgrade, if you're creating a new empty database and loading data, in all these scenarios, you want to ensure that your baselines and profiles are there. You use the packages that are available, you create a staging table, you pack it, you transfer it over a database link or a data pump, export import, and then you unpack it on the target server. So basically get your baselines and profiles and test it, test your application. Again, these are basic data and data validations that are probably a part of most of our toolkit. That is object validations, archive log modes, sizing of redo log groups, FRA, use of SP file before we hand over. So these are some things that you should be careful about when you are working on you're actually migrating the databases. Now working toward the last part of it, that is getting all the last pieces together. Once you're done with the migrations, you've copied over the data, you have everything in place. You now want to do all your post migration stuff. So one of the things is ACLs. Now, ACLs, again, often go under the radar, often go missed. Especially if you're coming from 11G and migrating to 19C. Make sure that you identify the privileged users on the source. Create according ACLs. For example, over here, I had 2 users who had access on UTL, HTTP, and INADDR and UTL mail. So I want to ensure that I have similar SMTP, HTTP, and resolve associated privileges on the later version. So use the ACE packages and use those packages to implement the access ACLs. That is. Again, there's a change that can, a very small change that can cause trouble. That is your resource role. It does not have your unlimited table space any longer, and this has been the case with since 12C. But especially since 11G is almost phased out now, and you're now trying to migrate off 11G, be careful. Determine the users that have resource privilege. Identify the table spaces they will need access on. You can do this with your DBA tab privs, role privs, views, and then grant the quotas or unlimited table space to those users. Otherwise, post the migration or the upgrade rather, the users will lose the access that they already had on the table spaces. So that's important. Again, cron jobs, do not forget the non-database and application accounts. At times on the servers, you've got all these extra accounts. So you've got to be careful about them as well. Simplify your scheduling via tags. Keep the scheme schedule, especially, you migrate your cron job, but at times you mix up the schedules. You want your backup jobs to be running at the same time. Things like that, small things. Test and debug, make changes to your cron jobs beforehand so that you don't run into problems during the migration day. Similarly, database and database scheduler jobs. Here the thing is about transform jobs. View your statistics job, because often at times what happens is that you end up with 2 sets of jobs, one with the pre-10G, pre-11G or pre-12C jobs, and one with the new auto scheduler. So make sure you've got a single set of statistics job, and that is the way that you want it to be run. So review them. Also review the performance of the jobs post migration. Sometimes what happens is that it can cause, okay, review it after this. The other thing is often missed, materialized view refreshes and underlying database links. Those can be things. And here's the thing is when you upgrade your database, it is pretty well documented that your DBA jobs are converted into DB scheduler jobs. But another thing to note is if your job is broken in your DBA jobs, it will get converted into a DBA scheduler job, but you lose your interval. So in case you've paused a job temporarily and you want to reschedule it or uh, reuse it at a later point in time, you'll have to manually get over the interval that you want to use. So be careful about the interval. Again, external credentials are something that you will need to modify because your OS credentials are likely to change on a new server. So you can use your credential package and update the credential as per the new server. And the last few things include, database directories, NFS mounts that you need to be careful about, especially your NFS, ACFS. If there are any additional mounts on your servers, have them in place, check the privileges, very small things, but handy in case of jobs that would be running on your servers. A part of our checklist. And be backup ready. Install the backup agent, have the free space, test your catalog connectivity, upgrade the catalog if you need, be backup ready. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the OraCheck and AHF. That is, once you're done with your build, once you're done with your entire setup, always it is highly recommended to generate an OraCheck report. You can generate, one thing to notice with the 19C grid installations, the 19C GI, if you notice over here, this is a 0-byte file. So you get an empty file with 19C GI. So you will need to install AHF to get TFA. So installing TFA is pretty simple. You download it. Once you've downloaded the setup, you are going to extract it using the AHF setup. You review the status. You can see all the tools that have been installed. And a best practice could be to configure your daemon, OraCheck to run in a daemon mode. And once you have that, you can see this is how it looks. And then you can do an auto schedule. You can schedule your OraCheck report to auto generate. For example, here I'm scheduling it to I'm requesting my OraCheck to generate an auto. I'm requesting my TFA to generate an OraCheck report, and I'm scheduling it to run first of every month at 1 a.m. So you see the next run, I can see the next run. It's now scheduled to generate a report on May 1st, 1 a.m. And once this report is generated, you can also set up auto email notifications so that you get that OraCheck report directly in your inbox. This is extremely handy. You can review the config changes. If there are any misconfigurations in your system, it will highlight it immediately. And the thing to be careful about in this configuration is it can consume space. So keep an eye on the space of your AHF location, and collection retention can be modified accordingly. So these are the things that we were talking about in a post-migration checklist. We just discussed these quick things, the quick wins that we can have. And last but not the least, if you can create a brick wall around your database, but shut down your source. The last thing you want is after a migration or an upgrade, you want a client connecting to your old database. You just don't want it. So shut it down. And these are some of the things that are good to check, but not necessary, but it is kind of good to have. You can use the opportunity to migrate over to secure lobs. You can consider read-only homes. You can run a security test check. So these are things that are good to have. Let that I'm done. And once you're done, you can of course chill, sit back and relax. We'll take a look at any questions if we have. So do we have any questions? I see none. Well, I hope you found the session useful. There are a few more things that you can look if you want to later. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to me over Twitter or LinkedIn. So